Welcome to the Belly Brain Connection. I'm Hannah Winans. I'm a certified functional nutrition counselor, and I'm on a mission to help educate people about the connection between their gut health and mental well-being. I believe that our gut health is the cornerstone to our overall health, and when we nourish our bodies, we nourish our minds. Belly Brain is for informational purposes only. I'm not offering medical advice here. If you need medical advice, please consult your physician. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today is episode 21. Last week was episode 20, and it was a little bit of a milestone episode for me. I did a little bit of a recap or a summary of some of the things that we've covered so far in Belly Brain, and also a little bit about my why and my reason for how this all came about, and a little bit about how it started, and also how do I feel when I'm doing this podcast and putting myself out there. And hopefully it was a little bit of encouragement for anybody else out there who is starting a new project. So if you're just new to Belly Brain and you want to maybe not go all the way through episodes 1 through 20, and you just kind of want to get a feel for what this is all about, I think episode 20 is a great way to start. And then you could go back to the previous episodes based on the subjects that you're interested in. But for today, what I would like to do is kick off a 3-part series. And this series is titled Gut Disruptors. We've talked a lot about the things that are really good for our guts. You know by now that I really believe that our health starts in our gut. And that we have power and control over what we're putting into our bodies, and we can have a say in how we feel overall. And so that focus has been, what are the health components of a lot of the foods that I talk about? How are we digesting our food? Just a lot of focus on that. But you can make all the right decisions, but if you're still constantly bringing in foods that have gut disruptors in them, then it's going to make things a lot harder. So it's not fun to talk about the gut disruptors, but I think it's important. And if you really want to take control of your health, then I think you need to have this information. So for today, we're going to focus on ultra processed foods. What are they? How do they cause problems for our overall health, specifically our gut health? What's the difference between ultra processed and processed? And what do we need to look out for when we're eating them? And what are some of the components in them that we know can really are causing the problems? I think instinctively we know that snack foods, ultra processed foods aren't good for us, but why is that? And what's in those products that is really causing problems specifically to disrupt our gut microbiome? So we'll talk about that. Typically, I do a food of the week, and usually it's a pretty healthy food. This week, I decided, since we're going to be on the topic of ultra processed foods, and most snacks are UPFs, is what we call them for short. I thought I would pick the potato chip, and we could kind of dive into, the kind of 3 levels of potato chips, and maybe end up with a healthier option. I think that a lot of snack foods that we're eating can be replaced with something that's a little bit better. So I never tell people, hey, you can't have snacks. You can't have foods that you enjoy. It's just reading ingredients and looking for that better option can make all the difference. So we'll talk about that. And then this week, I had somebody reach out to me and had a question for me that I thought it was interesting, and I wanted to bring it to you guys. They were basically reached out and said that they don't think they have really any gut health issues, but that they really noticed that when they're eating, basically the way they described them to me were processed foods. So things like, especially bread, um, pizza, these snacks that have bread in them, crackers, donuts, what was the other thing? Pastries, that they really feel tired, and they're really noticing a difference and pretty quickly after they eat those foods. So I thought I would talk a little bit about our blood sugar levels real quick, and how, a lot of times with these ultra processed foods or bread, which can be an ultra processed food for sure, especially if it's store-bought bread, that you may not immediately feel them causing disruption in your gut, but you'll feel them, you don't feel good after you eat them. And one of the things that people need to know is white flour, specifically, especially white flour, it breaks down like sugar in the body. So, if you're eating something like a donut, which has sugar and is also made of white flour, you're getting like a double whammy. I mean, you're definitely going to feel a crash after that. But if you kind of are just eating a lot of white bread products and even wheat bread, a lot of the wheat bread is disguised as health bread, and you really got to learn how to read your labels. And we're going to dive into that in future episodes. But that you're getting that spike, you're getting these glucose spikes because your body doesn't really separate that from sugar. So that could very well be a reason you're feeling or this person's feeling that crash. And my suggestion to them was to kind of just lay off the bread products for a week and see how they feel. We could dive further into gluten and I think that can have an effect on people, but I really think for a lot of people, it's not that they're gluten intolerant. It's just that they can't handle those spikes that they're getting off of these ultra processed bread products. So just be aware of that. If you're eating a lot of things that are doughy and have pastries or, like I said, pizza crust, crackers, and you're noticing you're tired a lot, then that might really have something to do with it. And we've talked about in previous episodes, backing those kinds of foods up with a protein, so you're not getting that spike. But getting them out of your diet ideally is probably the best thing to do. I know for me, I don't eat a lot of bread. And when I do, I usually try to make sure it's something really good, like from a bakery or a sourdough. And I really enjoy it, but I look at it as it's a treat to me because I do know that it's most likely going to spike my blood sugar just like a donut would. And so I'm just careful with that. And again, when you start to understand and you start to have an awareness and you can get off some of these foods that are really processed, you're able to get to a point where you can recognize the difference. You can recognize the difference of how your body feels when you're following your diet and you're doing pretty good. And when you kind of go off the rails a little bit, once can get to that point where you notice the difference, then you're going to realize you have control over it and you're going to be more careful about when you eat those kinds of foods that aren't great for you. So, okay, let's talk about processed foods and ultra processed foods. And if you see me looking around, I've got all my notes and I'm going to try and get this information to you in a way that makes sense. So what are ultra processed foods? I describe ultra processed foods as any food that comes in a package that has at least one ingredient that you don't recognize or you can't create a mental picture of, or you wouldn't find it in your kitchen. And if you really stop and think about that, that might seem kind of dramatic, but that's a lot of foods that we're eating. Now, we've been processing foods for years, right? So anytime you take a food out of its original state and you chop it, cook it, ferment it, that is a form of processing. And so I think sometimes people get a little bit confused between the distinction. When I think of an ultra processed food, I think of something that was produced in an industrial kind of way and that has synthetic products in it. And I know that in kind of the functional nutrition, functional health world, there's different ideas of what's considered processed and what's considered ultra processed. But my feeling is that anytime you're eating anything that comes in a bag or a box, you're at least eating something processed. And then from there, when you look at that ingredient list, if you start getting into ingredients that you don't recognize, then you're probably venturing into the ultra processed territory. Now, a more clinical description would be UPFs, ultra processed foods, are characterized by a high content of synthetic additives and emulsifiers and low fiber content, and they are associated with a decrease in microbial diversity and lower levels of beneficial bacteria. So we're always talking about bacteria in belly brain, and you know how important I think that it is. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about what some of these ingredients are. I'm going to kind of focus on emulsifiers today because that's something that is so common in these foods. And they're learning more and more about how those can really, certain emulsifiers can have a detrimental effect on our mucosal layer in our gut lining. And when we talk about that lining, we know that that's our protective barrier when we eat foods that keeps bad things from getting into our system. And so that lining is super important. And we want to be aware of the foods that aren't great for it, that are going to cause problems with it. Let's see. UPFs negatively impact gut health in several ways, including, and this is from the NLM, including reducing the diversity of gut microbiota, inducing changes in specific bacterial populations, and contributing to the breakdown of the intestinal barrier, which increases intestinal permeability, leading to the condition known as leaky gut. A disrupted gut microbiome balance has been linked to various health issues, including obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, chronic health conditions, and even some mental health disorders. So, again, they're making that connection. I think we know by now that when you start disrupting the gut microbiome, you really start to, your whole body is going to suffer for it. But what I'd like to talk about a little bit more is, well, what are some of these things that are in these ultra processed foods that we need to be aware of? And when you think about our bodies, this is kind of how I think about when we're bringing foreign things into our bodies that we weren't meant to ingest, which is a lot of what are in these ultra processed foods. I don't know if you've ever watched those food, I think it's on the Food Channel, but they'll show how some foods are made in factories. And oh my gosh, like some of this stuff, you wouldn't even recognize it as food until you see the finished product. And is that even food? What are we considering food? I mean, these fast food chains, a certain major chain, if you get one of their cheeseburgers, it doesn't even taste like it tastes like its own thing. Like there's nothing else in the world that tastes like a McDonald's cheeseburger. And if you were to make a cheeseburger at home, it doesn't even remotely taste like that. And we've been wired to think that that's food. That's not food. It's fast, you can eat it, but that doesn't make it food when you start thinking about all the chemicals and the additives and the way they have to process that food to turn out that product. And so, when we talk about whole foods in our diets, it sounds kind of hippy dippy. Oh, yeah, just eat whole foods. There's something to that. The things that we're ingesting, you would never find that in nature. So like when I think about those jelly beans that I lost it on last week, and I knew what I was doing. I knew I was going to pay the price. I was up for it. It was in the moment worth it for me. It was not worth it for me a day later. But I really was thinking about how we can be so hijacked into consuming these things that just really aren't food. There was nothing about that was food. It was not, I could eat it, but there was nothing nutritional in it, all kinds of chemicals, food dyes, blood sugar spikes all over the place. But we just consume. We've just have gotten so used to these ultra processed packaged foods that we've actually stopped realizing what is real food and what is fake. So that's something that when I look at our bodies, I think about, if you get stung by a bee or you get stung by a mosquito, your body, that's poison. Your body immediately is going to react. You're going to swell up. Your body is going to want to push that poison out. And that's how I kind of look at ultra processed foods. Our bodies don't recognize them as food. They don't know what to do with them. And so we're eating these things and our bodies are just going, whoa, what is this? I don't know what to do with it. Our gut microbiome, the microbial diversity that we've developed over, you know, so many years can't process these foods. And so we're going to pay the price and we're going to react to it. And so this chronic low grade inflammation that I feel like so many people have, definitely I feel is linked to a lot of those weird ingredients that our bodies don't know what to do with that are in these ultra processed foods. And even for me, I mean, if I go off the rails for too long and eat things that have too many chemicals in them or too much sugar in them, I am immediately inflamed. But I can recognize the difference. So I think a lot of people are inflamed and don't know what it feels like to not be inflamed. And so they don't have that point of reference. But okay, so I digress. Let's get back to some of the things that are in ultra processed foods that are directly causing problems. And emulsifiers would be one of them. So, what is an emulsifier? Emulsifiers are food additive molecules that work to prevent the separation of liquids that don't usually mix. These ingredients help to give foods the texture and consistency consumers expect. This is per the Food and Drug Administration. Now, three of these emulsifiers that I see in a lot of foods are carrageenan, guar gum, and lecithin. Lecithin especially, I feel like that's one I see all the time. When you start reading labels, you're really going to start noticing these ingredients and it's kind of going to blow your mind. So those are three that I see a lot of. Some of the foods that have a lot of emulsifiers in them that are pretty commonly used: margarine, Oh my gosh, if you're eating margarine, stop right now. Get it out of your diet. I can't. There's so much wrong with that food. Well, it's not even a food. There's so much wrong with that product that it makes me sick to think of how much of that we ate in the 80s when, it was bad to eat fat and we all ate this weird petroleum product. Ugh. Anyways, don't eat margarine. Mayo, ice cream, let's see, baked goods and salad dressings. A lot of those have emulsifiers in them. And I'm not saying that all emulsifiers are bad. There's a couple that stand out as being problematic. There's been studies on them that they're finding out that these are the ones specifically that disrupt or thins out that mucosal layer in our gut. But I'm trying to read this, carboxymethyl cellulose. So if you can't say it, you probably shouldn't eat it. That's what I'm learning. That's kind of a quick tip. Carboxymethyl cellulose, CMC, and polysorbate. Polysorbate, I see a lot of in ingredients list, and those are ones that they're finding out really can be causing problems, and they're in a lot of food. The other thing that's in a lot of ultra processed food are the food dyes, and I'm not going to get too much into that. Maybe that might be another episode, but we already know that there's studies and connections that they've made between these artificial food dyes and children and hyperactivity and all kinds of issues. And so we know that there's a movement to get those things out of our food. I'm just focusing on the emulsifiers in the food, but there's other stuff, right? We know when we eat cereal. So for instance, cereal is almost always an ultra processed food. Even if it's a healthy, quote unquote, healthy cereal, really look at the ingredients. In fact, most of the stuff that proclaims to be healthy, I actually look at that as a red flag. Why is it healthy? Or if it says no added sugar, well, okay, no, what do you mean by sugar? And what do you mean by added? Go look at that ingredient list. You'll see where they kind of snuck it in. So, but cereals are a really good example of an ultra processed food. And when we start getting into the sugar cereals, like, Trix, oh gosh, Fruit Loops with those food dyes. Oh my gosh. Now you're adding, not only is it ultra processed in so many ways, now you're adding these horrible food dyes on top of them. And, people are eating those for breakfast. So that's a great way to start your day, by the way. But anyways, I think that, not only are there just emulsifiers and high fructose corn syrup and, other chemicals and additives, but then you've got the food dyes on top of that. So, just another reason why you want to try and avoid these food or just limit them. You don't need to eat them every day. Every once in a while, your body's, you can have those things, your body's going to be fine. But for a lot of people, these foods are these ultra processed foods. A lot of them are developed to make it to where we can't say no and we can't stop. And a lot of the studies that they've done now are revealing that people who eat a lot of ultra processed foods, they actually don't get satiated because those foods were designed and engineered basically to kind of hijack our satiation, I think that's the word, response. And so it's, like when you think about, I'm going to bring up cereal again. There's a certain cereal I could eat that I love that I could eat the whole box and not even feel full. And that's by design, right? That's not an accident. The story goes, and some of you may have heard this, and this is something that I hear a lot of in the functional health world, is that when they started cracking down on big tobacco, a lot of those scientists and I don't know scientists, researchers, engineers, whatever you want to call them, they moved over into the food industry because that's about the time that we were really getting into ultra processed foods. And so they had the knowledge to kind of work with these foods and figure out how to make them addictive to people. And, there's something called the bliss point that a lot of these folks who work for these companies, they want to get these UPFs to a point. It's called this actual term called the bliss point, to where people can't stop eating them. And it's a product, right? I mean, that they're not looking probably from the lens of we're creating a healthy food. They're creating a product to be consumed. So just like in any business, they're going to make that product as fast, as cheap, and as addictive as possible. And so it's definitely something that once you're kind of aware of, and once you start really even looking at marketing and how the marketing of these UPFs work, especially geared towards children, you start seeing that it's all kind of geared to people who are addicted to something. And, if you have a diet of high in ultra processed foods and fast food, there's probably an addictive relationship that you've got. And that's not your fault. It's going to take more work to kind of break that addiction. So, anyways, as far as other ultra processed foods, you might be eating any store-bought bread. That's an ultra processed food. Um, Sneaky foods that people think are healthy but aren't, granola bars, those some of the worst, because there's also, we've talked about in previous issues, glyphosate, that a lot there's a high levels of glyphosate found in granola that's not organic. But if you start looking at the list of some of these protein bars, granola bars, and you look at the back on the ingredient list, you'll see that it's 30 ingredients long. That's not necessary for a a food like that. I can pull up a Kind bar, which I really like Kind bars. Those are probably, I'd move those into more of just processed food. They have pretty whole ingredients, and I can pretty much recognize everything on that ingredient list versus like a Nature Valley granola bar. Another example of a processed food that we eat a lot of that I think can be really good if it's minimally processed or fermented would be cheese, right? We eat a lot of cheese. I think cheese is fine if it hasn't been run through the processing of something like Velveeta, right? That's, oh my gosh, if you ever look at the ingredients on Velveeta, that is not a food. And if you make a queso with it, because my husband loves a queso made with Velveeta, and we have this conversation every time. But, like I said, everything in moderation. You can't even wash that stuff off a plate. Like I don't know what is in it, but it is not cheese. Or cheese-like products, right? But, eating whole cheese, full fat cheese is not necessarily a bad thing if you can handle dairy. So we're looking at, I get a really good cheese that I love. It's a European cheese from Costco. And I would look at that as a processed food. It's been through a process to make it edible versus something like Velveeta or American cheese slices, which are ultra processed. Okay. So really just kind of being aware and making that decision in your life. For some people, they're super advanced with their nutrition and they eat basically whole foods all the time and very minimal processed foods. That's great. For some of you, you just want to move from ultra processed to processed, and that's good too. It's again, just being aware and making smart choices. Okay, let's see. What else can I tell you about ultra processed foods and emulsifiers? Okay, here was a study that was published in the Journal of Nature Communications Biology in June 2024. They analyzed the impact of several emulsifiers on mice and found the additives were linked to bodily inflammation, along with higher blood sugar levels and insulin resistance, which can lead to diabetes. Synthetic emulsifiers seem to cause more harm than natural emulsifiers based on the findings. And more research I have here is basically emulsifiers may encourage bad or inflammatory bacteria to thrive while interfering with the good bacteria in your gut. So lots of connections between ultra processed foods and our gut health and how it can be problematic. I think that if you struggle with gut dysbiosis at all, by now that you probably want to limit those foods. So what are some ways that you can avoid ultra processed foods, or at least start learning a little bit more about which foods you're eating are ultra processed? I'd say this week just really check out the ingredients of what you're eating. It's pretty simple. Luckily they do have to list ingredients on all the ultra processed foods. Now, I know that they've come up with names to make things sound different than what they are, specifically sugar. So sugar is one of those sneaky ingredients that they've come up with different names for. But again, if you're going, maybe you have a favorite chip or a favorite cracker that you eat every day and you haven't really paid attention to what's in it, check it out. See how many ingredients on the back of that box can you recognize? And is there maybe a better option? Do you want to do the homework and try and find something that is similar, but is better for you? So when I talked a little bit earlier about our food of the week, the potato chip, what I wanted to use it as an example of how you can do better in some of the foods that you really love. For instance, Pringles. That is not a chip. I don't know what that is, but it's not. It's basically, if you look at the ingredients, you'll see that it is potato powder mixed with a bunch of stuff, and somehow they magically make it look like a chip. And I think we know that, right? Like if you eat a Lay's potato chip, it doesn't taste at all like a Pringles, but that is a snack food that is clearly highly processed. And I think they're the ones that say you can't just eat one. I think it's Pringles, maybe it's Lay's, but regardless, it's been developed to make it hard to stop when you're eating those snacks. So you compare that to a Lay's chip, which I looked at the back of the Lay's bag, and that is three ingredients. I think it was salt, maybe corn oil. Okay, so not a great oil. So if you can stay away from seed oils like that, that would be really helpful. Those have been proven to be pretty inflammatory. So corn oil, potato chip, and salt. Okay, three ingredients, maybe not too bad. I'm not sure in the processing if it's something where they just slice the potato really thin and they throw it in the fryer like you would at home, but at least it's just got the three ingredients. Although I'd be concerned about that corn oil for sure. And then I found a chip that is, I think, even a better option, and that is the Boulder chip. I think that's Boulder chips, the kettle style, and three ingredients there, but it's potato, avocado oil, and salt. Just a better alternative, a little bit more expensive, but maybe you eat less of it. So maybe you enjoy something that is really a food that is a little bit better for you, and you don't eat the whole bag. Maybe it's going to satiate you more because it's more better quality ingredients. So Boulder kettle style chips with avocado oil, those can be a really good option. But again, it's moving, like, say you're a Pringles fan. Okay, well, maybe you move to Lay's. I mean, it's not that I would ever support that kind of a food necessarily, but baby steps. Or maybe you move from Lay's into the Boulder kettle style chip. But you can still enjoy the things that you love to snack on and just look for those better options. One of the things that I really love, I don't do a lot of potato chips, but I do love sweet potatoes, and I love sweet potato chips. And sweet potatoes have a lot of, they're pretty nutrient dense. So they're a really good option if you want something that is crunchy and sweet, and I think they're really satisfying. So I love let's see, they're called Jackson sweet potato chips. Um, I found those at the grocery store. There's another brand I think that I found at Costco, and I couldn't quite remember the name of it, but it's a big bag, and it has both of these are made with avocado oil, which is again a much better alternative to canola or corn oil or soybean oil. Again, very few ingredients, really satisfying. So it's just all about, like I said, being aware and trying to make better choices when you can. And those good decisions, they stack up. Learn about what you're eating. You're building your mitochondria every day. You are what you eat, and you're also what your body does with the food that you eat. And I think that some people just get discouraged and kind of don't know where to start. Don't give up on yourself. You deserve to feel better. There's people in your life that need you to feel better, and you do have control in some of this. So let's see. I think that is it. I hope that all made sense today. I feel like I was all over the place. Just really try to really be aware of what you're eating and make some smart decisions and let those compound. And for next week, we're going to continue the gut disruptors, and we're going to dive into sugar. So that's a hard one. There's going to be some stuff you don't want to hear, but we're going to have some stuff that you do that might be really encouraging too. So, and I don't think we need to talk too much about why sugar isn't great for us, but I would like to dive into more about kind of the hidden sugars and what are some really good alternatives. I may have done that in one other episode, but I do want to kind of tie this in with the whole gut disruptor series. So thanks, you guys. I will see you next week. Take care of yourselves. I hope this helps. Bye.